Gospel this morning is according to Mark in the 13th chapter. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones, what large buildings." And then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." And when he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he.' They will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still not to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdoms against kingdom. And there will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." And this is the gospel of the Lord. Many of you asked, did we have a good time last week? Yes, Leslie and I took off. We went down to Myrtle Beach for the first time. Yeah, it was. It really was. Watched the sun come up over the ocean every morning. Nice, fresh, hot cup of coffee. And on our way back, we returned on Sunday mornings around 10:30, and we drove for a couple of hours, and Leslie said, "How does it feel not to be in church on Sunday?" Which is rare for us. And I thought to myself, I kind of felt like I've been in church all along. We passed 25 Baptist churches. I've never seen so many Baptist churches in all my life. I come from the north. I've passed 25 Catholic churches. But as I went by, I began to think, but that is kind of the glory and the magic of living in a free world like ours. This open expression of people's faith and religions. And you see different architecture, and you see different modes of worship from temples and Orthodox, Jewish, Reformed, Conservative, and all of the different Christian denominations, and even more so in the Muslim places of worship that are rising. And I think to myself, this is one of these places where we have absolutely no idea of what it is to have all that taken away. What if it's taken away? What if it's gone someday? And I think we who have never been really attacked, at least in many generations, that is why we were so stunned with 9/11. We couldn't believe that it would come to us. It was always somewhere else. It couldn't happen when nations rise against nations. And that is what this morning's text brings forth. Because as you heard when Butch was reading the first reading from Daniel, it's talking about Michael, the angel, the great prince. Protector shall rise up in your time of anguish. But what did that mean to them? Because this is approximately 165 BC, and at that time Rome comes in and sweeps over them. And at that moment of time, Rome also says, "We shall invalidate your religion. We shall invalidate your faith." And so they sent forth a decree that Jewish worship shall no longer be legal. Now they had a problem, Rome did, because when they went into other lands, it was almost automatic that the conquered people, maybe grumbling a little bit, sooner or later assimilated the Roman gods, along with that mixture of Greek gods. But when they came to this small, rather poor country, they would not do it. They fussed and they fumed, and they may have been subjected physically, but in their minds, they were not about to turn to anything that was Rome in turn of gods. And as time went on, we know that that has been the history of Israel. And even as you were hearing the reading from the Hebrews, it's talking about all what a priesthood used to be before the destruction completely of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Because when that happened, it destroyed a way of living and life and belief forever in the lives of Jewish people. Because with the temple, there was a centrality of where you belonged. You went there if you could once a year during Passover. You recall that at Jesus' Last Supper, it was the bringing of the Passover feast. And at that time, lots of people crammed into Jerusalem. The area around the temple packed with people. There really were money changers on the outskirts. And there really were animals and children and noise and dust. 30 years previous to Jesus being there, there wasn't a huge riot. And then, at that time, they were quelled, and hundreds of people were crucified. And so Pontius Pilate knew during that time he wanted no further uprisings, and so he strengthened the Roman guard. In any case, it was in 70 AD when the whole thing came tumbling down, when Rome said, "We have had enough. We will destroy the centrality of what you believe your faith is." From that moment on, Judaism was irrevocably changed. It was no longer temple worship, it was synagogue worship. They had existed before, but now they became the reference point of where a Jewish person could come to worship. Now, I say all of this, you see, because throughout all of that history, and I looked on CNN this morning, only at the moment when the screen came on to see Israeli rockets, 3 of them rising up into the sky, and they were sent there to destroy the other rockets that were coming from the Gaza Strip, courtesy of the Hamas. And it was like, nothing has changed. Not much has changed. They're not killing with swords. They're doing it from the sky. And yet they seem to hold on in some shape or form. And when you see all of these things, you begin to think to yourself, well, is this what Mark was talking about in Jesus' words this morning in the Gospel? When you hear of wars, rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. This will take place. The end is not to come yet. For nation will rise against nation, and there it is right in front of me this morning at 7:30. Kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes in various places. There was one recently. There will be famines. The stats are out. 870 million people go to bed hungry every night. And this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. So what are you going to do with this text? It looks like a foregone conclusion, doesn't it? That we really ought to be scared. Because I have no idea what's going to further happen on CNN tonight while we're even here worshiping this morning. And it gives us pause for thought that we who think we are so safe, that we are so far removed from all of these things that happen in other places, but not here, that we have nothing to fear. Before the first service started, I said, what would you do if somebody came in here and closed us up? What would we do? What do people do when people try to take their faith away from them? There is a story about a Lutheran pastor who, with 3 other people, went deep into Siberia after the fall of the USSR, and they had heard about this group of small Lithuanian Lutherans who had been sent out in probably the year right after the revolution, 1920s, and they were banished. And somehow they managed to survive. And so this pastor and his friends, after much research, went out to Siberia and found them, and they did survive. Not by much, they were incredibly poor. They had little or nothing because they were sent out there with only the clothes on their back. And so when the pastor arrived, who spoke fluent Russian, and said to them, "We have found you, and you have survived. We have ways of helping you. We have ways of getting you food. We have ways of finally building you a church so you don't have to hide in your homes when you worship. We're going to do all of this for you. This is what we would want to do for you." And the oldest man of the group stood up in front of him and said, "Right now, won't you just preach to us the gospel? Won't you just give us the word?" All of that stuff can go later. We have 3 generations now that have gone by that have not had that word spoken to us. We were denied taking even our Bibles. We have had to depend on telling one generation to the other without the written word. We had to talk to our children, hope that they would pass it on. It's happening, and it has happened. And I know perhaps we are playing with something that seems inconceivable this morning. What would you do if all of a sudden someone came in here and closed us down, saying you will not come into here anymore? Would we have that strength, you see, to secretly meet in each other's homes? All our Bibles taken away, passing the word on generation to generation from our mouths to the ear of the next person, telling our children about the story of Jesus, how Israel survived all of the stupidity of those places that tried to trample them down, but they could not. What would we do if we were closed down today? Would we have that faith and that strength? Would I get a phone call? Would I get a phone call? I don't know. Oh, I don't know, from Luther and Debbie saying, Pastor, secret worship at our house today. That's what had to be done, and that's how the church started. We sit in splendor. Look around you. Look at what other people have created for us this morning. This church, the sound of that organ, the choir, your voices, our altar, our bread, our wine, it is something that we just say, well, it's always been there, and it always will be. But the test of time, you see, doesn't necessarily say that things are always going to stay the same. And at any given moment, the criteria of who we are will not be so much the heat of this building, or its light, or its sound, or its structure, or its beautiful roof. But what the people under all of this decided what was of the greatest importance in their lives. And the greater that importance, the more perfect it becomes when we are able to speak it to each other. Not just here, but anywhere. So, as Jesus says, when you hear of wars, rumors of wars, don't become alarmed. These things take place, but the time of end has not come. I'm telling you, you're going to see nations rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. You will see earthquakes in a variety of places. You will see hungry people. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs. But what he didn't give us was the date. And as a result, we are called to get up tomorrow morning, God willing, and to start our faith all over again, rising out of our homes and hopefully once again, God willing, to talk to each other when we come back here to this church next week about what it means to live in the end times, knowing for sure that goodness and grace and justice and love is going to win despite the rockets. Amen.